So we're going to jump right into this, starting with some stats from a 2023 study from the Pew Research Center about how Black adults view the news in the media. So 63% of them say news about Black people is more negative than other communities. 57% say news they see or hear about their communities only covers certain segments or is missing important information, and 43% say it largely stereotypes their communities. So when we think about what we just heard from Professor Glaude and all of these efforts that have been made to establish a robust press presence in these communities, why do we still see these numbers? And Amber, I'll start with you.
Yeah, thank you, Paris, and thank you for having me. I think those numbers in the study really reflect the fact that people are not happy with how things are being covered. And why is that? You know, let's go back to 2020. Let's go back to that moment of the racial uprisings and the so-called newsroom reckonings. There were these newsroom reckonings that were supposed to be happening then, right? We were supposed to be seeing more people who look like us in front of the camera and at executive levels and at every level, really, and across, you know, not just the ones writing the stories, the ones taking the pictures. And I think all of us can speak to the fact that what we witnessed was that reckoning was not effective. And you still have people who perhaps were given empowered maybe in name only, or in title only to maybe make these decisions and lead these decisions. And essentially the decision makers are not really at the front of the table to shape the coverage. And then you have people in the community who don't know who's behind the product. And so the ability to really get out there and show people who are in the community and who need to get to know who's there.
Now, Jenee, of course, you launched A Beautiful Resistance at the Boston Globe in the aftermath of this racial reckoning, or as it was unfolding. And you have been able to give that visibility not only for yourself, but for people and just documenting their joy and their existence. How has that been effective in regaining some of that trust?
I think I would have two things to say. One, I would want to add to what Professor Glaude was saying about representation doesn't do much if your theology doesn't match. What I would add to that is there were a lot of people who, I don't know what's happening here. Sorry, guys. There were a lot of people who rose to leadership and were empowered. I was one of them. Ours happened fairly early. Like A Beautiful Resistance was born in July 2020, so it was kind of slightly ahead of things. I think if you're one person of color at a table, if you're one Black person at a table of everyone else white, yes, you're empowered, yes, you can make change, but you can only do so much. And I think that we are victims to Black exceptionalism. So sometimes we confuse one person having power with everybody having power, or one person being a billionaire with everybody having wealth. And yes, building A Beautiful Resistance definitely built trust and cultivates trust, but that's because I'm in the community and I am working off hours. It's not my Globe out. I am a deputy managing editor at the Globe. That is my actual day job. So A Beautiful Resistance is almost everything after that. It's me in the community on the weekends, at night, showing up in events. To me, the real trust is happening in what Ron is doing and what, Bay State Band or Diaspora Mass, what I would idealize for the Emancipator to be able to have, outside of umbrellas of institutions. That is where, to me, legacy trust will be built. It's why the Defender is so important, and we should always celebrate the Defender wherever it is, however it is. I love what I do with A Beautiful Resistance. I love being in community with the community and witnessing, and I will never downplay it, but I recognize that I do that within the confines of an institution.
And you teed it up perfectly for me to turn to Ron and to ask, talk a little bit more about the role of the banner and the role of the Black press in general, but what have the challenges been to sustaining that presence?
Thank you so much for having me, and I want to thank all of our guests for being here, and thank you so much, Jeneé. The history, I want to remind everybody, but the history of the black press came out of the need for us to have our own images in the media. Commercial media, historically, going back hundreds of years, was always derogatory. And that is why Frederick Douglass was so inspirational in his time, making sure that his images were so stately and prominent and positive images, and why he literally became and fought to become the most photographed man of his 100 years, of the century that he lived. As black communities historically know, if you want to see a positive image in a true story about yourself, going back even in the recent past, it was the black media, the black newspapers, black-owned newspapers that told your story. So historically, the major black communities have been skeptical of commercial media. And then upon the election of President Obama, the media was weaponized again, and derogatory images were put out to empower those who wanted to, denigrate his election and denigrate black people overall. So we, as a new owner of the base that Ben purchased a couple of years ago, for me, it was important to continue the legacy of telling the truth about our people from a grassroots, from a local standpoint. So we have reporters that work locally, within our community, making sure that community voices are heard. We see overall nationally the shrinking of community newspapers of all ownership types, and that's very damaging, I think, to the community overall. So I'm happy to be able to continue the legacy and tell the true stories about our community, good and bad, which I think is very, very important in this day and age, as we see Black history, American history, Black history, which is American history, attempting to be erased.
Given that we're seeing newsrooms dealing with challenges of being, remaining financially stable or retaining top talent, how is that nuanced in a black newsroom?
Well, top talent is important. We have freelance writers who are very well known and write for various other publications. We have our own staffs. So retaining important talent is, retaining quality talent is important. But I think the most important thing is having a managing editor and having publisher and the direction of the paper and making sure that you're telling the truth. I came from 27 years in commercial television, a CBS network here in Boston. And the reason why I left was because I saw the trend towards what I refer to as influencism. There's journalism and influencism. And when a reporter is writing a story and they tack towards the most emotional part of that story to motivate a response, then that's influencism, trying to influence your audience to listen to your story. And what happens is if you do that, then at the end of the story, you have to try to explain, what we scared you about? That's not really the case. The case is actually this. But by then, you've already tainted the journalism, and it's not journalism anymore. It's influencism. And again, there are great reporters in all mediums, but this is a trend overall because as the ad base shrunk, folks are in those industries, the motivation is to get the biggest audience you can. So that was a trend I saw. So I was happy to be able to transition to the ownership of a paper where we didn't have to worry about those things. Yes, we have to have advertising, we have to get support, but our journalism can focus on the clear journalistic values that we try to follow.
Now, Edosa, you come at this from a different angle because you founded Diaspora Mass, which is a media platform, and that amalgamates a lot of different things that are happening in Boston's Black community. And we know that more people are getting their news from social media by the day. And I'm curious from you, is that a good thing or a bad thing?
That's a great question. First off, I just want to say it's an honor to be here.
Y'all are so gracious. Yeah, we're glad you're here. Thank you for thanking us for having you.
But to answer your question, is it a good thing or a bad thing? I don't know if it's, I don't think it's neither good or bad. I just think, my generation, we are more kind of prone to viewing, kind of getting our information, our news through like social media, podcasts, websites, and stuff like that. And so I just think, I think with each generation, you have to approach each generation differently, and I just think if you want to approach maybe like a younger generation, you have to target them through social media, Instagram, Twitter, where they are more visible and present.
You're underselling yourself a little bit. Yes, it's a generational thing, and it's about accessing them, but it's about accessibility, period. We have, in order for the journalistic model to work, we kind of have to have paywalls. We need subscribers. We all have to eat. And even that being said, none of us are making very few media platforms are actually turning profits. But through Instagram and TikTok and social media, there's an accessibility that happens. There's no paywall. So you actually can feed the people where they're at. Diaspora Mass does an amazing job at making sure people across the community know what's happening in their communities that look like them, whether it's a Kiki hangout or it's a panel or speakers coming into town. And then they also make sure news that is typically paywalled is disseminated amongst that free community. When A Beautiful Resistance first started, it was on Instagram for that reason, free. So you could get people's stories. It was a democratized process. Then we have the film and the stories behind the paywall. But I never stop anybody from screenshotting it. People screenshot it, they share it, they repost it. Our videos, after they've been up for a couple of weeks, go on YouTube. It's an accessibility thing, and I just want to make sure it's not, I think sometimes we're like, that's the young people thing. It's not a young people thing. It is more prevalent among the young people, but intergenerationally, accessibility is real. If you're an immigrant, you're more likely to listen to audio. And Diaspora Mass is doing Emancipator as well, amazing work. Me and Ron are holding the old guard, but we're doing it in new ways. We're doing it in new ways, but I mean, the way that they're doing it is very powerful. So I don't want you to not shine your light.
I want to add one thing to that as well, and I want to remind everybody, and this is one of the most important things to me. I have 2 college-age children, and for them to get all of their news through social media was horrifying to me during the election because of the things they came and asked me about. My children are college educated. They're a sophomore and a graduate this year from colleges around the country, very smart kids from what my interpretation was, but their questions were horrific. And that's because the media that they received was from social media.
What were
it was
some of the
being
questions
manipulated.
they were asking?
There were a lot of questions I don't want to repeat about Kamala and a lot of the propaganda about her campaign. And I had to sit them down and say, listen, you're receiving information, you're receiving propaganda. And it is important to me that when I took over the paper that I made sure we had a website that was state of the art, that we broke down our stories into all the different platforms. And one of the things that was part of our original plan was to create a half-hour streaming newscast that we currently are 12 episodes into. But the half hour of that news isn't the point. The point is that we can take each individual story and put it on Instagram as an individual story. And 4 weeks in, one of my sons called me and said, Dad, how come I see the banner all over my Instagram? I said, that's because my team is doing what they're supposed to do. But I make jokes about it, but it is really crucial for us to get real news to our young adults because they are going to be guiding the country as it moves forward. And the forces that want to suppress the better opportunities in our society know that, and that's why they're feeding them this propaganda. And that's why smaller news outlets and other alternative presentations of news, just to wrap it up, as a Black print paper, we still have the older audience that only gets their newspaper from this. The churches, the community centers, we have over 400 drop sites. But the other half of that, the most important half for me, is to expand it to the 18 to 40-year-olds. That's the key, getting it in their hands.
So Amber, what is the onus on legacy media organizations? Because you can create the content, right? You can set up, and folks should know that Amber created NBC BLK at NBC News in 2015. And this was revolutionary at the time of kind of creating this platform that was specifically for Black audiences within this organization. You can create the content, but what do the organizations have to do to make sure it's getting in front of people of all ages?
Yeah, when I launched NBC BLK in 2015, and I had spent a decade as a producer at NBC Nightly News, the top #1 news show, #1 newscast, and I remember my executive producer saying, are you sure you want to do that? You're at the #1 show, there's maybe some other opportunities. I think you might get siloed there. You might get pigeonholed there. And I had a number of even mentors saying, you're going to go over there and you're not going to get the resources, and your content's not going to get elevated. And so I found that I had to, what hit me there was that I knew that I needed to try to push for things. I needed to try to stand up for our stories. We're producing for NBC Digital. If we have a story that's powerful, I need to walk into the EIC's office and say, we have this story. I know you saw it, you heard about it, I pitched it, and it's getting buzz, and also, or it's important. I remember I wanted to send someone to Charlottesville during the Unite the Right. Before that rally, we had a plan. And I was really told, well, we're going to let the affiliates cover that. We'll see what happens. And I had to learn, to go and stand up for the story and fight for it. So I think that's what I found being in the legacy organization. It was like a responsibility where I had this platform and I had a lot of freedom. I had the freedom. I could think about the stories that they don't fit in a 20-minute broadcast on nightly news. I could produce work and elevate other writers and journalists and contributors who weren't getting their work picked up by other mainstream outlets and who now are at storied places and outlets around the country. And I feel great that that's another part of it, like that pipeline of journalists and giving those opportunities to them.
But was it a problem that you had to go and fight for those stories and for those angles?
Yeah, it was a problem because, there just were some also, I think we can also talk about language and framing. Some in our profession think that our role as journalists is to present the information and to allow the audience to figure out what they want to do with it. But the truth is, the press has always had a powerful role in framing the facts, and that shapes audience perception. And so I think I ran into issues where a very senior executive would say, well, I don't think we're in the business of calling out racists. And he was kind of missing the point. We're not calling out racists in our journalism. But what we're talking about is the through line and the racism at that time that Michelle Obama was experiencing, and how these attacks were racist. And we have to say the thing. And I think that's what I appreciate about launching the Emancipator is we're trying to say the thing that people maybe don't want to say or don't want to talk about, and give that platform to call things out, but not just to call it out, but to explain the historical context of how we got here, and also what can be done. So I think it's a challenge in legacy media organizations, having been there, having been at other, from Condé Nast to Viacom, and even working for, a Black publication at Viacom, just having the ability to get beyond what's trending, but also something that is very important for the brand. We call it brand building stories that we know will build trust, that they may not be the highest trafficked story, but they're important stories, and we know that our community wants to see those stories, and we hear from them, and we hear from them on social, because we're reporting things differently, because we have that freedom. We'll have a story that is first reported on social, and then the next day we might post it on the site. So we're kind of reverse engineering, knowing that the audience, young and old, wants that social first approach. And being social first is not just posting a link. And this is what all of us are doing up here. It's not just let's post the story. It's let's have another way to engage with this audience that is platform specific.
And Edosa, I think you all do this really well on Diaspora Mass, because in addition to what Jenee mentioned about posting headlines, you all start a lot of conversations, right? It could be anything from what's it like to be from an African immigrant family versus from a Black American family in Massachusetts. And you can go to the comment section on some of your posts and you see people are offering all sorts of opinions, right? And so that's where we sort of see where the media aspect comes in versus news. But do you think that helps people feel like they have more of a stake in the stories that are being told about them?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the comment section a lot of times is where people engage with each other. A lot of times people comment things, and it may come from like an uninformed stance, and then you have somebody else in the community who is probably prominent in their community, maybe started this organization, started that organization, and is able to inform that person, hey, look, this is, not correct. Here's the link to this article or this article, so now you're more properly informed. So I think, we do a pretty good job of that.
But does it get a little messy in the comment section? Because sometimes, right, we're living in a time where even facts are being debated. Sometimes you can go on a comment section and there's a sub-comment and there's like 500 sub-comments, right? Where people are debating something that, and before times, maybe we would have all accepted as fact. But now people are saying, well, I heard this here, and it can be really hard to discern what actually is true.
Yes, no, you are very correct. It does get messy, but I think, just people kind of just get into the rabbit hole, and, people read all the comments and kind of just decipher, what information makes sense to them,
Comments trigger me.
I also feel that in the messiness is the point. In the comments is the learning. So you have to definitely try, as I'm quite happy that Edosa's platform does, is to give them references to the facts. Because the way that you get a society to vote against their own best interest is to misinform them, to present alternative facts, which, as we all know, are lies, and then utilize that misinformation to encourage people to do things that aren't to their own best interest because they are misinformed. So then you get into the questions in the back and forth as you have to decipher the misinformation and try to explain to folks. And I think that that it's great that there's another platform for that dialogue. And that's how young people interact in that platform, so we have to meet them where they are and still continue to dismantle that misinformation.
Also, just kind of wanted to throw it in there. I'm also very aware that not everybody's on social media, not everybody's on Instagram, not everybody has heard Diaspora Mass. So, we also, have like a WhatsApp community, for people who don't really know how to use the Instagram, the Twitters of the world. And so we try to move the conversation from Instagram and Twitter to the WhatsApp, because I know I have aunts, uncles in Africa and other parts of the world who want to engage with Diaspora Mass, and they enjoy the conversations that are being had, but they can't use Instagram, so they use the WhatsApp.
And sometimes that word of mouth is the first way that people hear certain pieces of news. Now, Jenee, you mentioned earlier, you talked about the paywall, right, and how social media has the ability to allow people access who may not necessarily see the value or maybe can't afford a newspaper subscription or to donate to their local public media station, for instance. But how do we make that value apparent to Black communities?
So I'm the second Black woman to ever be on the Boston Globe's masthead, like ever. And it's well over 100 years old, heading towards a couple of decades away from 200 years old. And we have the most expensive subscription model, like we are a very expensive paper to subscribe to. I would argue it's worth it. I am biased. I want to pay my bills. But I wouldn't work there if I didn't think it was worth it. When it comes to building that trust and getting people to invest, something that Amber was talking about when she was working within the institution is we do have to fight for those stories. Before I built A Beautiful Resistance, I was a columnist. I'm still a columnist. And even as a columnist, who my literal right as a columnist is to write whatever I want, there were times when I had to have spirited conversations about what I was writing or the headline I was writing. But you can't, if you've been lying to people or creating disproportionately negative images of people for decades, you can't just create Black things or Latino things within those platforms and then expect them to just suddenly give you their money and be like, we trust you now. Mm-hmm. Or just because you did a series and that series was really powerful, that doesn't earn you a get out of propaganda and Payne free card. Mm-hmm. You have to go further than that. You have to do the stories. You have to have the conversations. You have to actually be in the community. Journalists, and not just at legacy media, but journalists in general, influencers in general, I think sometimes prop themselves here and forget you live in the community. You are a citizen of this community. We are in community with the community. And if they don't see you, Why should they believe you? Why should they trust you? If they don't see you in the neighborhood, if they don't see you at their coffee shops, if you're not showing up at their community events, I throw events and they're free. And they're free and it's my labor outside of work hours. But I do that because I know how important it is to create that space and to build that trust. And if you're not willing to go that extra mile, your shit's not gonna work. If you're building something like Diaspora Mass, if you're furthering the legacy of the banner, like, you have to be outside. You gotta touch some grass. And so it's like, and sometimes that requires your own resources. And that's important. Like, I can't ask people to give me $30 a month if I'm not showing them what they're paying for. And it can't just be about me and my work. I have to show them other people's work too, and other journalists that they can trust too. You have to build those relationships. I'm not afraid to be like, yes, support Ron. Yes, support Diaspora Mass. Yes, Amber, let me introduce you to X, Y, and Z that can help you with Emancipator. Like,
It's collective.
it's collective.
I also want to add, just as a footnote, the banner is still a free publication and our website is free. We have that benefit, that privilege. But it hasn't always been that way in the past. It used to be back in the day, I think it was a quarter or 10 cents or something like that. But since I purchased it 2.5 years ago, it had been free for a long time. And we're a full advertising model. But there's also begged the question of, where does the advertising influence end and where does journalism begin? And we have a strict separation between the two. But I think in Black communities, it's very important to have a free model of news dissemination. And hopefully we will never have to go to the steps that other commercials, like the Globe does with the paywalls and those things, because it obviously will reduce the number of folks who receive that news. Our website has been around for probably since 2016, prior to our ownership. And even when we modernized the website and advanced it, even prior to that, you had folks going to that website from Australia, from multiple countries in Africa, from Asia. And I think the reason for that was that Boston is an international city. Students come here from all over the world, they get that experience, and then they travel wherever they travel. And since that news is online and there's no paywall, they can still stay in touch, and that's a long-standing connection to the paper.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jenee, I do want to follow up with you 1 second about the Globe's Fresh Start initiative, because this is something that the paper has done to try to say, if you feel like there was something we reported about you that was inaccurate or that cast you in a negative light, you can request, put in a proposal for us to update that. How is that, what have been the results of that initiative thus far?
So Fresh Start initiative came out of our Inclusion Council, and Peter Bailey Wells does an amazing job helping lead this initiative. And basically we meet ever so often, field applications. And to be quite clear, a lot of the applications come from wealthy white criminals who, sorry. But you know, they're like, there's this story about my court case where I did this thing, and it comes up every time I try to get a job, and then I Google them, and they've got a job. And we're working really hard and diligently to make sure people in marginalized communities know about Fresh Start so that they can make their appeals, because that's literally what we built it for, because we recognize there's so many. And we've gotten away from this type of reporting where it's just like people are just listening to the police scanner and like somebody stole a bunch of T-shirts from the Foot Locker. Their name didn't need that. One, that didn't need to be a story, and two, their name didn't need to be in it, and it didn't need to be dragging them through the mud for decades because they shoplifted when they were 16. So I think it's helped a lot when it comes to allowing people to reclaim their names and to reclaim their rehabilitation or their healing, and allowed us constantly to be interrogating why we do a story and why we name a name, particularly when they're petty crimes and things that don't make sense. So yes, there is a disproportionate, like, white wealthy man did a bad thing applicants, but there are a lot of stories of people who we were able to kind of give them some closure, and not just give them a thing, but give us a thing by allowing us to reframe how we cover crime.
I think
Thank
the
you
biggest.
for that. One second, Ron. I just want to come back to Amber because we're our time is precious here. But Amber, the Emancipator has announced that it's moving to Howard University and HBCU, of course. And what excites you about that? And also, what is the benefit of having a Black publication being shepherded and it's wrapped around in the arms of a Black educational institution?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really exciting prospect and opportunity because part of what the Emancipator has always we've been trying to do is, number one, elevate some of the scholarship and research and the brilliant minds that are, we're talking about trying to explore and explain solutions to racial inequity. There are people working on this. There are smart people we need to talk to. And a lot of times we're seeing the same names or the same faces or the same voices on all of the platforms that we listen to. The idea of tapping into that brain trust and that Black excellence at that level is amazing. And then you've got at the student level. Actually, for our election coverage, we reached out to a number of HBCUs around the country, asking them, "Can you chronicle election night and send us video? And we're going to pay you. We're not here to exploit you. You will be paid to record and capture what this is like for you. This is an historic night." So actually on Howard, we had a few students who did produce work for us, and we were able to elevate. And just to have them giving us that story through their lens was important to build that relationship with them as a population, to give them that dignity and respect as young creators, and to also not leave them hanging, but really talk to them and teach them, here's what we're going to do and here's why, and we're treating you like you're a producer, and we're going to mentor you and support you. So I think tapping into that field of journalists, I mean, the Emancipator has already worked with Boston University students on investigative series. Northeastern has done a project for us on the end of affirmative action and on restorative justice. So we've been able to kind of pilot this idea of deep reporting with students over the course of a semester. And I think, being at the HBCU, like that population and that community, we are trying to reach. And of course, we're Black-led, but we are also covering all different marginalized communities. And I think that's an exciting place to tap that energy.
And this work, though, is happening in a time when the press is under attack and educational institutions are concurrently under attack. So what is the biggest threat to the work that not only you, but everyone here is doing?
I mean, I suppose, my 6-year-old is aware, and she has asked me, like, is someone going to arrest you? Is the president going to arrest you? Are you going to be arrested, Mom? I'm afraid for you. I mean, this is trickling down at that level, and at that level of fear, as far as what could happen to us as journalists. There are literal lawsuits against journalists we know and publications we know or have worked for, and so there is some fear there. I guess I just have to keep a little bit of hope that the audience and the community can rally around and support, and some of that is with funding, with viewership, with signing up for the newsletter, with talking about the work that we're doing and spreading the word.
Edosa, does this give you hope for independent content creators like yourself?
No, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, there's a lot more independence when it comes to when you have pages like, Diaspora Mass, A Beautiful Resistance, and you have people are streaming now, and those are kind of platforms that aren't easily, you can't easily just take away, as opposed to just removing something from a website. So I think, I just think there's newer ways to get information out there that kind of that kind of shelters you a bit. So, yeah.
I think.
So we have about a minute left here, and I want to ask each of you a question that we ask everyone who we have on GBH News Rooted. And Ron, we'll start with you with one thing that is keeping you rooted right now.
Keeping me rooted right now is, I guess, my history in Boston, my family connections, my desire to make sure that, the legacy of my family and my people and my community it continues despite the external pressure to dilute our story and our history. The banner is Black-owned, but we tell stories Black and brown and allies, and just try to have pure journalism about the truth of our country and its
Beautiful.
importance and a responsibility. So
Thank
that's what
you.
keeps-
Jeneé, what about you?
What's keeping me rooted is, honestly, I don't have a very hopeful answer. It's more about, I'm thinking about what you asked Amber about being fearful right now about this. The last time this man was president, I had to change addresses. Like, I literally had my life threatened credibly and had to find a new place to live. And the Globe was bomb threat. We had a bomb threat last time. And so, yeah, I'm scared of being sued. And what keeps me rooted and arrested and killed. But what keeps me rooted is that responsibility. It is our responsibility to fight back. It is our responsibility to witness. It is our responsibility to hold ourselves to the highest standard of spiritual awakening and fighting for one another's humanity and personhood. It is our responsibility to understand we have a privilege that so many don't have by being able to just be on a stage like this and speak out. So what keeps me rooted is remembering who we are and whose we are and the legacy of resistance we come from, and that the fact that we woke up today means it's possible to make it better.
Amber?
I'm thinking on the same lines of mission. I'm thinking about running a publication that is rooted in the abolitionist press. And I'm thinking about that responsibility where you had to radically reimagine what could be possible at that time. This is a time when people didn't think slavery would ever end. We're in a time where we feel like racism is never going to end. So what do we do about that? We can't just hang back. We can't just sit back. And the Ida B. Wells line, to right wrongs, you must shine the light of truth upon it. That also rings with me in terms of just that. It's really that responsibility and that mission not to give up, that there are a lot of people counting on us to storytell and to provide these counter narratives that are so needed.
And last but not least, Edosa.
Yeah, I guess what keeps me rooted is, trying to bring my community together, trying to bring communities together. And, with Diaspora Mass, the aim is to provide value. That's always been at the forefront of my mind. Everything comes after, values provided. And so every single day, I'm always thinking, how do we provide more value to the people who interact with, our platform?
Well, Edosa, Ron, Jeneé, and Amber, thank you all so much. Another round of applause for our wonderful panelists. I wish we had more time. I know it always gets cut short, but thank you each. And thank you to our audience as well for showing up, and we hope you enjoy the rest of the summit. Thank you.